Some big talk coming from the state of Alabama over the weekend. Dabo Swinney talks about going to the Hall of Fame, and an upcoming Auburn player talks about possibly winning the Heisman. We'll tell you all about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hey everybody, it's Brandon Adams, and this is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson, fresh off his trip to Talladega. We're glad to have you with us here for SEC Country Live for the next hour. Now, we'll do a lot of the draft stuff. At a certain point, aren't people kind of draft out at a certain point, though?
I definitely am. I mean, I was at Talladega, but still heard a ton about the draft. And, I think it's one of those things that moves on to the NFL fans now. It's not so much for SEC fans.
That's exactly right. We pass the baton to the big city folks, and they can enjoy these guys at the NFL level here. We'll do some draft stuff over the course of the show, but I wanted to start with a couple of issues not draft related, including item number one on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I think the chances of Dabo Swinney becoming the replacement for Nick Saban, Alabama, get more and more likely by the day. Not to say that it's definitely going to happen, and not to say we even know when it might happen, but certainly there are wheels being greased here for why it might happen, or at least why Alabama might really want it to happen and try to have it happen. Our buddy Ryan Fowler, who does the Alabama SEC Country podcast every day, does a great job on that. He was at the Alabama Hall of Fame banquet over the weekend, I guess. This is the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, not the University of Alabama, but the state of Alabama. And one of the guys going into the Alabama State Hall of Fame is Clemson coach Dabo Swinney. And he had a great line. Now, if you've ever given a speech, you got to understand something. Well, even if it's like a toast at a wedding, these things are not hard to pull off, right? It's a very tough environment. But listen, the money way in which Dabo delivers this line gets a great laugh. But you know what? It's not completely joking. There's some seriousness to this as well. Here is Swinney on why he's going into the Alabama State Sports Hall of Fame.
And I'm also here because that's just how good Alabama is these days. If you beat them, they put your butt right into the Hall of Fame. Don't play Monopoly. You just skip, go, and right on in. Just right on in there.
So good stuff from Dabo Swinney. You see Paul Feinbaum doubled over in last night.
Yeah, he did.
Right there on the dais is Feinbaum, and he thought that was very funny there. I think it's well done. It's a really well-delivered line there. And as I said, there's an element of seriousness to it. Swinney's got, not just as a former Alabama player, but he's got ultimate respect within the state of Alabama because he did beat Alabama on the field. And a lot of Crimson Tide fans, they do give some respect for that because it'd be very hard, Mike, for anybody else who's an Alabama rival to come to the state of Alabama, give a speech, have it be well received. It's almost like Alabama fans, the wheels are spinning here about the clock turning for Nick Saban and what is sort of the winter of his career.
Yeah, I don't think it's just the fact that he beat Alabama and Nick Saban. I think it's the way in which he goes about talking about it. He pays the respect back to his alma mater in a lot of ways that I think some people come up short on a national stage. It's Dabo saying, hey, listen, really proud of what's going on at Clemson, but let's be honest about what Alabama has been over the last 10 years. And I think that's why people give him that respect in the state of Alabama. And I think Paul Feinbaum actually had a lot of insight. I don't know if you saw his comments about sitting there. He said, I think it's more possible now than it ever has been, Dabo Swinney going to Alabama. He says being around him, being around the people in the state of Alabama, understanding that his wife comes there, his entire extended family comes from there, it became more possible than ever. And Paul Feinbaum said, just seeing him interact with everybody, that this is a possible next career move. Now, obviously, there's a ton of other stuff going on, and it's all about the timeline. But I think as we move closer to that point, when Nick Saban starts getting up there in age, you do start to wonder about how Dabo feels behind the curtains, and I think that was a little bit of introspective.
I think you certainly get the sense from that speech, that honoring. I think there's a timing to everything, and clearly, this is a guy that has a lot of cachet within the state of Alabama right now. My prediction, though, is Dabo Swinney will be offered the Alabama job, and he will turn it down. I think that Clemson's become the kind of program that you don't have to leave anymore. And as recently as a couple of years, sort of pre-national championship for Clemson, that was the kind of thing that would be unheard of. Clemson as a program was far inferior to Alabama. But now that's not really the case anymore. Look at the Clemson facilities that have been built. You joke about like the putt-putt course and all that kind of stuff they have, but the fact of the matter is they have a football-only facility. and it's a beautiful place. And really, if you just saw the facilities of the two schools, you wouldn't necessarily know that Alabama's got a lot more history than Clemson. The facilities, the present tense of the two programs, certainly make them look equal. It's also worth pointing out here that Dabo Swinney, as a recruiter, goes about his business very differently from Saban. They're both elite recruiters. They both bring in elite talent. But Dabo does not really process kids out of his program the way that SEC schools do. Dabo does make the early offers the way that Alabama likes to, but for the most part, Clemson sort of sticks by its guys, and they expect people to stick by them. In other words, Dabo has built a recruiting machine at Clemson that's sort of hard to replicate other places to get the best of both worlds. He gets elite players without the ugly part of it. At least from an outside perspective looking in, you don't have the ugly business at Clemson that you have at a lot of these SEC schools. Why would you want to leave that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for him to take the job. I will admit that. I don't think he turns the job down. I just don't know that he takes it right away. I think that's going to be the tough selling point. Do you want to be the guy that follows Nick Saban in Alabama? I don't know that anybody really wants to be that. I also think the other dynamic for me as far as looking at that situation is, how did Nick Saban leave? I think if Nick Saban retires and becomes some kind of administrator or wants to be, some kind of AD and actually is the guy that goes and recruits Dabo, then I think it's going to be hard for Dabo to turn down. Now, if Nick Saban, if he heads elsewhere, wants to be, I don't know, president, general manager in the league, Tom Coughlin style, then I think that maybe Dabo looks at it and says, you know what, I'll wait for that air to clear over there in Tuscaloosa before I try to make any move from Clemson. But if Nick Saban's the guy going on the road to Clemson saying, listen, I'm going to be your AD, or I'm going to be the one over the top of you. Together we can do this thing over at Alabama. That's going to be hard for me to look at Dabo and say he's going to turn that down.
Jennifer Allen on Facebook says that Dabo wishes that he could be Nick Saban's replacement. I think we're at a point now, though, where Alabama needs Dabo Swinney a lot more than Dabo Swinney needs Alabama. I mean, he's got a good job. He's won a national championship, been in the playoff 3 years in a row. If it's not Dabo Swinney as the eventual Nick Saban replacement, who are some of those obvious likely names to be that guy? Is it, Jimbo Fisher, who once worked for Nick Saban? Is it Kirby Smart? Well, he's not going to leave his alma mater, Georgia. At least it seems hard to imagine he would do that. The coaches out there that have the Saban ties, who would be the most likely names to replace Saban, for the most part, they're all in pretty good situations here. Alabama doesn't have another obvious name to turn to if Dabo Swinney, would choose not to take that job. Sort of like the political thing of kind of the next guy in line or next person in line to run for president. Swinney's the next person in line, and there's really no one in line behind him after that.
Yeah, there's nobody quite on Dabo's level. Now, I will tell you, from being around Alabama fans, and you could probably already see it in the comment section, Jeremy Pruitt's the guy a lot of people are hoping comes to that occasion. But there are so many hurdles between now and that decision to be made. I mean, Jeremy Pruitt's got to prove that he can even be a head coach, much less get to that point where Alabama might offer him the job after a Dabo Swinney or after Nick Saban leaves. So I know there's some other names that are always kicked around. You're going to have, always some good head coaches that are around that Nick Saban thing. That's why I think it's important to look at how Nick Saban leaves. Is he part of the program still, or is he completely gone from the state?
Robbie Ebersole says that he hopes another 8 years for Saban, and obviously Alabama fans certainly hope that. But to go back to your point about Jeremy Pruitt, for me, that's the only way you get a Pruitt to Alabama is you got to have about 8 more years of really vetting Jeremy Pruitt, because there's a lot to like about Pruitt. His energy is high. His recruiting chops are pretty well established. But man, sideline demeanor. I can't wait to watch that from him this fall. Does he have that appropriate sideline demeanor? Is he too much of a hothead? Is he too much of a, sometimes high energy can have a tendency to bubble over and sort of boil over. Is there too much of that when it comes to Jeremy Pruitt? If I'm Alabama, Pruitt needs about 8 good years of showing me that he's got the demeanor to become a head coach. Look at Will Muschamp. Looks a lot more like a head coach now at South Carolina than he did at Florida. He looked like an assistant to me at Florida, looks like a head coach now. Every time Jeremy Pruitt speaks at Tennessee, he looks like an assistant coach. The clothes a little too big,
Taylor hasn't quite caught up to him.
The mannerisms, the speaking style, not quite as polished. He looked like somebody who should have a boss as opposed to someone who is the boss.
Yeah, no, I agree to an extent about some of that. So, like I said, there's a ton of hurdles between now and then. I think Matt Markham's comment is kind of interesting. Tosh Lupoi will be groomed. His ascension speaks volumes in such a short time. Now, I don't know that Tosh Lupoi is the name that I'm really looking for, but I do see a lot of young guys that have been brought into this program. I look at a guy like Pete Golding, grew up in the state of Alabama, went to Delta State, I believe, right across the state line there in Mississippi. He's been around that kind of program. Now, you're talking about a guy that's young. I think he's 34 years old, something like that. But you look at another 5 years, it's not out of line to think that somebody being groomed under Nick Saban right now could possibly ascend to that job and Nick Saban give his blessing.
I know Tosh Lupoi is a good coach. I almost know nothing about his personality. Right. Is he a head coach in waiting type personality here?
He's one of those. I think that he's like a young Kirby Smart in a lot of different ways. Very intense, very lively on the sideline. Kind of has, that raspy voice where you've been yelling at everybody, kind of jumping up and down on the sideline. That reminds me a lot of what Kirby Smart was 10 years ago when he got to Alabama. It was very energetic, almost to a point where you're losing your voice at all turns. And you've heard that Kirby Smart rasp, when he's yelling at players all day. That's what Tosh LaPoy really reminds me of.
Enrique Murillo on YouTube does remind us here when we think about potential Saban replacements, don't forget, working as an intern, you got the champion of life himself, Butch Jones. I mean, maybe Butch Jones, another go around in the SEC as Alabama head coach. Maybe that's the marriage waiting to happen here.
I don't think that one's going to happen. I think you got a better shot of seeing the one that's not an intern, Hugh Freeze. Circle back to that job. Butch Jones, no way.
One more thing that Enrique Murillo mentions on YouTube is don't forget tomorrow, FCC Country Live coverage starting at 5:30 p.m. of the Grayson Four, as they're known. Big-time recruiting battles here involving Kevin Harris, Wanya Morris, Kenyatta Watson, and the five-star linebacker Owen Papo, all going to make their choice. We're going to cover it for you live here on SEC Country. Tennessee, Auburn, LSU, Alabama, Georgia, a lot of SEC schools in the mix for these four guys. We'll do all that with you tomorrow on SEC Country Live, on SEC Country, our video channels after SEC Country Live. We'll start that for you at 5:30 p.m. Let's do item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and pretty big, bold talk coming from an incoming freshman Auburn running back. AL.com caught up with Harold Joyner, and Joyner was asked about the next phase of his football life as he begins his college career here, and he's got some big things on his mind. Here's what Joyner told AL.com. He wants to just come in and play early, then maybe become the next Saquon Barkley, who was the first running back taken number 2 overall in the first round of the NFL draft on Thursday. Hopefully, I want to win the Heisman. You okay with this as a veteran player, hearing the incoming freshman's already using the H word in conversations here? How do you feel about that?
Now, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it where I'm sitting right now at this desk talking to you. I think, listen, set lofty goals for yourself. Why come in and say, boy, I just want some playing time? I mean, I think that as a guy who looks back at that, set lofty goals. If you're a team, I want to win the national title. I think you have to be realistic with yourself, but set lofty goals. I think the interesting dynamic for me always as a player was sitting in the locker room listening to somebody that hasn't even been in that locker room yet or worn a jersey, making these expectations known for himself. I mean, you got to think that, what is there, 5 guys sitting in that running back room right now that battled it out during spring camp and that, went through the A-Day game down there and really tried to get touches and have really battled their way through their career. And now you got this guy coming up behind you that hasn't even shown up talking about winning the Heisman Trophy. I think that's what makes it difficult. But where I'm sitting right now, I have no issues with what the kid said. Make it a lofty goal. Make it known that what you want to do. Make it known that you want to be multiple and, go in and take the bull by the horns.
There's a story that I heard in Hollywood one time of this young actor who was like walking around the street one night during the filming of a movie, and he's like doing his hands like this, and he's doing all like this. And the director of the movie walked over to him and said, "Dude, what are you doing?" He said, "Hey man, I'm just trying to feel the air and experience the streets because next year I'm not going to be able to walk down any road without being mobbed by people." As it turns out, the guy that said that was Vin Diesel. And in his case, that story became true. A year from that moment, he was that famous. So sometimes these bold proclamations do come true. For the most part, I feel like there is an inverse relationship with people who talk about winning the Heisman and people who actually do win the Heisman. You have the Johnny Manziels of the world who you wouldn't necessarily have expected this for. Or Herschel Walker back in 1980. He won the award in '82, but in 1980 didn't even really, was not really thought of in that regard nationally. You have some of this kind of stuff nationally where the Heisman Trophy can kind of sneak up on you a little bit, and the guys who sort of enter their career sort of bragging that way, that's not necessarily the way things work out.
Yeah, and I think there is a part of me that looks at, Nick Saban talks about this all the time, the process. It's day by day, right? Put your nose down, focus on what you have to do in that day to get better, and don't look at the end result. Don't look at, I want to win a Heisman Trophy. Say today I want my first step to be better, or I want to be, quicker laterally. There is a part of me that thinks that, but there's also the part of me that looks at Harold Joyner and says, why not? Yeah. I mean, there's a history of Heisman Trophy winners at Auburn. You're one of the best players, coming out of that signing class. Why not Harold Joyner? And so I think I like that he's stepping into that situation. Now, I'm telling you, the guys that are in that room reading that, we had a guy that was signed, I think he was in my signing class, the one after me, says, I'm going to come in and break out, Derek Thomas's sack record. I think he had 3 or 4 career sacks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just one of those things where you
college football is hard.
But you know what?
College football is very hard.
You show up, and the rest of the defensive line group's looking at him going, oh, you're going to break the record, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you showed up. You think it's just that easy, and it doesn't turn out to be that easy most of the time.
All right, let me get a few comments here. Will Ward says, Joyner needs to earn the job first, then win the Heisman, #humble yourself. And I kind of agree with Will on this, because a lot of people are kind of saying the same thing. Gary and Christian Gosano says, BA, would you want Justin Fields, who's an incoming freshman at Georgia, to come in and say, I'm okay with being second behind Fromm? I like it when kids have high expectations for themselves. Lonzo Quintelis Carter kind of says the same thing. Love the confidence. I see nothing wrong with it. Here's the problem, though. Joyner was not among like the top 5 running backs in the country here.
Right.
And I don't mean to pick on Joyner. He may go on to have a very good college career, but this is a guy who would not be, for me, one of the 3 or 4 running backs for Auburn most likely to play this fall.
Yeah.
He's not on my list. I sort of, kind of agree with what Will says here in that you got to earn anything before you can sort of start talking about the next thing, because there's one thing to have a lot of confidence. There's another thing to have that confidence sort of poorly placed or misplaced. In this case, for Joyner, this may be more misplaced confidence.
Well, you definitely have an angle there, and I think Matt Markham brings up a good point. He goes back to Leonard Fournette. He scores as a freshman, and he's doing the Heisman pose in the end zone, and he ended up being obviously a very good player. But
yeah, he was a first-round draft pick, so by doing the Heisman pose, he's not that far off.
Exactly. But I think we can look. What do we do? We look back at the last 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Baker Mayfield's a walk-on quarterback at 2 different schools, transferred to middle. Lamar Jackson, a lot of teams wanted to play a wide receiver and safety coming out, and he wins the Heisman as a quarterback.
Those are good examples.
Yeah,
better ones than I gave.
I don't think that you can kind of set brackets around him right now. By the end of his career, he might be that running back, and I'll go down this road too. I don't know if any of y'all read the article over on AL.com.
Please.
There was some interesting stuff in there.
Is that right?
So in terms of recruiting, there was some interesting stuff.
Oh, please, you got to give us some of this.
Yeah, So he talks about, first of all, why you go to Auburn. Well, I really trusted Gus Malzahn.
Yeah.
He said he was lied to down at LSU. He said the LSU coaches lied to him about who they were offering and when they were offering and times they wouldn't answer the phone. Thought that was, to me, that tells you a lot about LSU being like, hey, are we really interested in this guy? Hey, are we really not interested in this guy? He also says the guys that go to Alabama, why would you want to go there? You're gonna sit behind 3 or 4 guys. You're gonna be so far down in the depth chart. You're not gonna. I don't know if anybody told him this, but there was like 7 freshmen on the field in the national title game.
Right.
I thought it was so interesting looking at why I did it. I also thought it was introspective for Auburn fans. You ought to love this. Gus Malzahn brings him in, had a personal reel, not of him, but of what he wanted him to be in Gus Malzahn's system. Had a bunch of old Gus Malzahn players. Had Charles Clay from Tulsa. This is what I want you to be within our system. This is how we see you fitting. I thought that was very awesome and very personal from Gus Malzahn.
On Facebook, Malachi Morgan said, hey, Mark Ingram was a 3-star recruit. He won the Heisman Trophy. It happens. One thing you got to remember, though, Harold Joyner doesn't have big number 78 blocking for him now. So it's going to be a little harder for Harold Joyner to win the Heisman Trophy without running behind the big 78 train over
I think
here.
his odds went up without having me blocking in front of him. He's probably better off for it in the end, for sure.
All right, let's do item number 3 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and some very interesting stuff for, you mentioned LSU and running backs a moment ago. Now, former LSU running back Darius Guice, who fell out of the first round in the NFL draft, landing in the second round to the Washington Redskins, and in controversial fashion why he did, Ian Rappaport on the NFL Network went into some detail about why Guice was falling and completely disappearing from some NFL teams' draft boards. This is interesting, and it leads to a pretty provocative debate. Here's Rappaport.
There certainly were some teams that had concerns about Darius Guice really throughout the process. A couple things worth noting here. First of all, on his visits, I'm told, for a lot of the teams, it did not go well. In fact, there was an incident with the Philadelphia Eagles involving a shouting match during his actual visit with them. I talked to someone involved, said it was the worst visit, the worst meeting they've ever had with a player. No one doubts the talent, but teams felt on Thursday night and then Friday again that his stock was really falling. And once that happens, teams feel like we can slide back as the Redskins did and maybe grab him. So that is kind of why his stock fell. It kind of goes from one team to another team, and everyone realizes that he might be there later than they originally thought, and they say, all right, well, maybe we can slide back and take him. As well as, by the way, they started doing more investigations looking into some potential incidents at LSU, some things that caused concern, and a reason why he was off at least a couple teams' boards pretty late in this process.
Off teams' boards is a pretty bold statement here. And if you listen closely to Rappaport, and listen, I am not going to take shots at Rappaport's reporting. I don't know his sources. I don't know any of this kind of stuff. But there's an element of this that feels very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
Because if you listen closely to what he said, he described some teams who had concerns about Guice and other teams who sort of moved in the direction of the teams that had concerns because they were hearing things from these other teams. So according to Ian Rappaport, some guys were moving off of Guice simply because they were hearing whispers from other NFL teams. Is there any truth to this stuff, though?
Yeah.
And is there any tangible nature to what people don't like about Darius Guice?
Right. Well, some of the stuff I read, it says that, there were some teams that uncovered some incidents that weren't previously reported down at LSU. Now, if that's true, I don't know. What those incidents were, I don't know. I can't help but feel a little bit bad for Darius Guice. I really can't. I mean, Rashad Penny, Ronald Jones, Kerryon Johnson's a good back. You look at the two Georgia backs that were drafted ahead of him. Darius Guice is a very good back, and he's going to be a very good NFL back. And I think to me, as a guy who's been in that position, it's so overblown. Does he love the game? Is he really going to is he going to be playing video games? It's so overblown to me. You have a job to do. When everybody else goes home from work, you don't sit there and ask them, boy, do you love going to sit at your desk tomorrow? I mean, it's just, you do your job, and you do it to the best of your ability, and that's what Darius Guice is going to be asked to do, and that's why I think he'll be fine in the NFL.
Good stuff on YouTube. Tyler Mann says, Mike Mayock ruined Darius Guice draft stock. Until I see proof that this actually happened, I refuse to believe it. Guice has never been in any kind of trouble for anything. Also, Shannon Burgess says on YouTube, I think this is all backlash from the NFL striking back after the sexuality question accusations. Do you remember this?
Yes.
At one point in time, the draft process, Guice said that a team asked him if he liked men sexually. There could not be any, basically the NFL says there was no proof this actually happened.
Right.
So that's an LSU fan saying there's backlash against that. I will say more from the NFL Network here, where one of the guys on the desk, I don't know who this is, asked Ian Rappaport about a specific allegation that one team knew something specific. It's a very direct, specific question, but the answer here from Rappaport's not specific at all. Take a listen to this.
You reported a little bit earlier that there could be a situation that, if revealed, could be embarrassing for Darius Guice as well as all parties involved. Any indication as to what that may be right about now?
That is one thing that some of the teams are kind of looking into now. A couple different things happened at LSU when he was there. Kind of local incidents that really did not get the publicity that maybe it would have gotten, let's say, had it not been in a college town. Some teams are doing some homework now and dedicating some resources, or let's say the Redskins are, but before the draft, other teams were dedicating some resources to try to figure out what exactly is there, what incident or incidents do they need to know about. And for the Redskins, he's their guy now, so if anything does come to light, it's really going to be them all over it.
I just think this is incredibly dangerous. I think that Ian Rappaport's probably a very good reporter. I really don't follow the NFL closely enough to really know his reporting on a daily basis, but he's got a huge name for himself. He's on the NFL Network. He must be very good at his job. But this notion of, hey, this guy disappeared from some teams' draft boards, moved, from the first round, which most people thought he was going to go, into the second round because of an incident that happened in Baton Rouge that didn't get reported because it's in a college town. I feel like it is owed to Darius Guice to make this public. If he did something bad, then shame on him, but let's make it public. And I hate to smear Guice in that way, but at this point in time, he's already been smeared. Darius Guice has already been given the label of bad guy. What is the motivation for calling Darius Guice a bad guy? Is it just because he showed up late to meetings, and is it just because he likes to play video games? Maybe he's not, all about football, to go back to something you talked about before. If that's all it is, then put it out in the open. But what Rappaport and the other NFL Network guys here are sort of talking around is the idea that something specific happened in Baton Rouge that's not good. Well, if that happened, then somebody ought to go on the record and say, here is... Even if the story itself is not true, at least to report this is why NFL teams didn't want to draft him, because they had suspicions about fill in the blank.
Yeah, and listen, I followed Ian Rappaport. Ian Rappaport was actually a beat writer at Alabama when I was in school, so I followed him, and he swings and misses a lot. To put it lightly, he swings and misses a lot. He's one of those guys that when you hear something, he's going to report it, for good or the bad. He's just going to report it, and he's going to see what happens, and sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But I can't look away from the fact that there's something to this. I mean, Ian Rappaport, he might not be right. There might not be an incident, but there's something to this to where the NFL is falling back, and evidently a lot of these teams heard it for themselves.
Ross Dellinger is a good reporter for the Baton Rouge Advocate. He caught up with Darius Guice during the pre-draft process on the heels of a charity visit and some workout stuff. And at the time, as you might imagine, Darius Guice was frustrated about the way that all these rumors were kind of bubbling up here.
I had a great time with the kids today. They loved me today. It was fun. We was jumping around, having a great time. And all I get is backlash. Like, I got character issues. I'm a bad person. I do this, I do that. I've never been suspended, never been arrested, never been in trouble with the law, never been in trouble at LSU. And now I'm getting all this backlash like I'm just such a terrible person, like out of nowhere. So it sucks, man.
So never getting suspended, never getting arrested, never getting in trouble, that's not really the standard that I want to hold guys to, because, listen, there are a lot of college football players that have gotten away with all kinds of stuff, never getting in trouble because it gets swept under the rug. We're all well aware of that. In fact, we're very easily able to point that out for our rival teams. Sometimes for our own teams, it's a little bit more difficult to point out. So, that standard for Darius Guice, that's probably not the highest possible standard to measure by there. But I understand his frustration. He's hearing all of these things, and no one's either willing to go on the record or sort of publicly state, seemingly anyway, what it is that's the smoking gun here that makes Guice undraftable in the first round.
Yeah, it did, and it's seemingly, I can't remember where Lyle Collins ended up going. You remember Lyle Collins, the offensive lineman? It was like a murder charge that came out like the Wednesday or Thursday before the draft, and this guy was slated to possibly be a first-round pick, and I think he ended up going undrafted. He ends up being a very good lineman. I think he plays for the Cowboys now as a starter, and so it's weird, and it is very frustrating, and I will be rooting for Darius Guice until something bad comes out that he actually did do. I'll be rooting for him, because until then, it's all hearsay, and this seemingly is a pretty good kid.
Esteban Esteves on YouTube says, you think he runs violently before, you can just imagine how he's going to run now in the NFL with all that BS hanging around him. And maybe that's the case, but for now, with this sort of like unfinished story, and we'll never hear any more of this. I mean, the NFL media has already moved on.
I disagree. I don't think there's just so much media nowadays. Something's going to be asked about Darius Guice. Somebody's going to be.
I just feel like we move on so quickly. We're already talking about the 2019 draft if you follow the NFL folks.
Right.
But while this is sort of an unfinished, unresolved story, it's actually a pretty bad look for LSU. This actually hurts LSU's recruiting efforts. I hear from time to time about parents that do get spooked when they hear about, trouble at certain school, or a guy that was supposed to be a first-round pick, but he ended up being taken in the second round because there were some whispers about how he was disciplined, or how maybe a lack of discipline for that individual at LSU. This is a negative recruiting peg for the rest of the SEC to kind of hold on to here. And you can roll your eyes, but SEC teams use this kind of stuff. I don't know if it sticks to LSU or not, but teams that recruit against LSU for like John Emery Jr., elite running back of the class of 2019, this Darius Guice story is going to be fed to a guy like John Emery saying, do you really want to go to a school where their star running back just dropped out of the first round?
Yeah, I don't want to stick this to LSU though, because it's like I said, I'm until I hear the news, until I see this, until I see some kind of allegation from somebody, then I'm on Darius Guice's side. And in terms of that being said, I'm on LSU's side. I don't think it's a bad look for them until this comes out. I mean, listen, we sat here a few weeks ago and asked if Nick Saban had brackets on people over the Reuben Foster stuff. Now, his girlfriend saying it never even happened. And so I think it's tough to kind of pin this on these schools. Now, I do agree with you that it will possibly be used as a negative recruiting tactic. I think people are kind of grasping at whatever they can right now to get recruits on campus and negatively recruit. That's what I thought was funny about the article from Harold Joyner, where he's like, man, freshmen don't play at Alabama. But, I think this is a point in time where I'm going to have LSU's back on this one until I'm proved otherwise.
Matt Markham on Facebook has a pretty interesting, we talk about the idea of the Darius Guice story kind of going away. He says, how often do you even hear about the Laramie Tunsil gas mask incident now? I mean, this stuff does,
that's true.
Draft week, this stuff's as big as it can be, but by the next week, we've all just kind of moved on to something else.
That's so true. That Laramie Tunsil stuff went by the wayside. Of course, not for Hugh Freeze. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not for him. For Freeze, he's still dealing with it.
Around for a while.
All right, let me do item number 4 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. And you never love seeing this, but it's a factor every single year. There were 6 underclassmen who declared for the NFL draft from the SEC that did not get drafted at all. I believe our staff has put together a graphic here of these guys. Surprising, Jeff Holland from Auburn, Cameron Petway, the running back from Auburn, yet Eddie Pinheiro, the kicker from Florida. A lot of kickers don't get drafted anyway. Trent Thompson, the one-time #1 overall player in the country for the class of 2015. Kevin Tolliver from LSU, also Toby Weathersby, the offensive lineman for LSU. What do you make of these guys not getting drafted? Is it too simple to say that all 6 of them should have gone back to school?
No, I think it's way too simple to just say that. And especially in the case of Eddie Pinheiro, where you look at it and say, listen, he's going to be in a camp. It's very possible that he beats out a kicker that's already on the roster. I think that this comes down to one of those things where, is there a threat that somebody else is going to take him, or do I need to pay him this money? I mean, Roberto Aguirre is not even on the Bucs roster anymore. He was drafted in the second round. So it just comes down to who's going to want him and where. There's a couple of I don't know, shocking's not the right word, but I am surprised by a couple of these. I mean, Kevin Tolliver, to me, he didn't reach his full potential at LSU, but he's a big body corner and still put up good numbers and still can do some things. And that's hard to find, that combination of size and speed. So I thought that you'd see a guy like that possibly go. Jeff Holland to me as well. I mean, you're talking about a guy who really had the numbers at Auburn last year. I think there was some,
I mean, every team that played Auburn last year will tell you. Fans spent all week talking about him. Coaches almost for sure spent a lot of time focusing on him in the film room. This is a guy that you spent a lot of time paying attention to if your team was getting ready to play Auburn.
Now, you want to talk about being negatively recruited, because this came up about Carl Lawson as well. Remember, Carl Lawson shows up with Kevin Green, to his pro day to show that he can drop into coverage. Same question was asked about Jeff Holland. Can this guy drop into coverage? All his focus was on playing defensive end, and at 252 pounds, he's going to be a specialist pass rusher, and that's the reason he slipped through the draft. So there are some crazy ones to me. I'm not that shocked Cameron Petaway goes undrafted. Toby Weathersby, to me, was a little bit of shock when he came out as well. But, I compare all these guys, and I think Taven Bryan's a great example. We're going to talk about Taven Bryan later in the show. Taven Bryan, it's not like he splashed on the scene. A lot of people think he's going to be a better pro than he was college player. It's just a flip of the coin sometimes when you come out and Taven Bryan moves up into the high end of the draft, and some of these guys go undrafted.
Let me get a couple comments here on this, including Bo Molinari, who said that they should have posted their GPAs next to that graphic. And listen, Bo's obviously having some fun, but there is an element of truth to that a lot of times you don't come back to school for your senior year because you can't come back. Now, I don't know if that's true for any of those 6 guys, but school's not for everybody, and certain people either need the money or just ready to sort of move on to a professional phase here. And, listen, only about half the people who graduate from law school end up getting jobs as lawyers. So this idea that, you shouldn't have gone to the NFL draft because there are more early entrants and there are space in the NFL. Look, almost every field that pays well has more people trying to be in it than there are room for. So from that standpoint, this is the way the economy works. People try to go to the NFL, and the NFL doesn't take them all. From that standpoint, this is no different than anything else.
Yeah, and honestly, I think Bo Scarborough, he was taking like the 7th round. I was kind of shocked when he left Alabama. You could have made the argument that he needed to stay for another year, but I think that he's kind of that case where you look at what's behind you and Najee Harris and some of the other guys, and you see
I'm not sure how many carries Bo Scarborough gets in a Najee Harris backfield.
Exactly. I don't know. Bo Scarborough looks at it and goes, okay, am I going to be better off for coming back, or is this my chance to at least get drafted? And listen, the 7th round, I think a lot of people would rather be undrafted. You can kind of pick your spots. The 7th round, you got to go where they pick you.
Stephen Early says, Trent Thompson, that's the Georgia defensive lineman who didn't get drafted, should have stayed. He was building momentum at the end of the year and could have been a big name this year. And Thompson, for those that are not Georgia fans, should know he had some nice moments in a Georgia uniform. He was the #1 overall player for 2015. For the most part, was always thought to be a real integral piece to that Georgia defense. But how about the idea, though, that hey, you come back, you make a big name for yourself for the following year? Isn't this one of those things that once the scouts are sort of poked and prodded at you, that you can't really change a whole lot of that in just 1 year? Or, you're a guy that went through all of this. What would you say about that?
I think you can change the outlook on yourself. Now, a guy for Trenton Thompson, we've talked about him a couple times, kind of a tweener with, it's got to be the size-speed combination, right? You have to be big enough to play a certain position, or you have to be quick enough to play a certain position. I don't know that it was tilted either way in his favor when you look at what he really was on the football field. But you definitely see guys that, okay, you know what? NFL scouts think I need to put on 20 more pounds, or I need to show agility to kind of change positions, or I need to be able to play safety and corner. You can go back and put that on film, and I think a lot of guys have done that successfully. I don't know if that was on the table for him.
Yeah, so I think what's going to be frustrating for a lot of Georgia fans here is that Georgia's biggest weakness in terms of depth for 2018 is defensive line. You've got this guy who was a defensive lineman, defensive tackle, gave the NFL a shot, and now he's ineligible to Georgia while Georgia could use Trent Thompson to do exactly what Trent Thompson always did in the Georgia uniform. It's why this thought that's been kind of kicked around about, hey, if you don't get drafted, why not just let you come back to school?
Yeah,
now, obviously for Georgia fans, there's a little bit of a motivation for arguing that, but for all college kids, every single one of these kids ought to be able to turn tail and come right back to college and go right back to playing football again, because how are any of their lives or any of our lives made better by them being ineligible by the NCAA?
I completely agree with it, and I think it's such a shame, because here's what you have is you have these guys that are in college and they're playing well and they're in the spotlight, right? A guy like Trenton Thompson is a perfect example. He's in the spotlight. Everybody's talking about Trenton Thompson. Everybody, Georgia's going to the playoffs or winning the Rose Bowl or going to the national championship game. He feels that spotlight. He thinks, okay, man, the sky's the limit. Got all these agents in his ear possibly saying, hey, listen, You come out, we've got you. We know all the GMs, we know all the scouts, we know all these agents. We can get you in the top half of this draft. And it doesn't end up coming to fruition. And the arguments that the agents are making are, boy, we got, we're putting $40,000 into this guy to pay for his training here or to get his diet right here. We got to do all these things for this kid. So, we have to pay for that, and that way you can't go back to college. I think it's a terrible argument.
On YouTube here real quick, Cliff Nelson says Tolliver should have definitely stayed. He would have been a late first or early second round pick next year. Morgan Recton, who's a Florida fan, says, hey, we'd still like to have Eddie Pinheiro and the Swamp LOL. Yeah, I mean, for most of these teams, there is something to be said for, LSU, taking grad transfers in secondary. There are a lot of guys who are like, these guys come back. That's an immediate need they'd be plugging in.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just Kevin Tolliver's play on the field. Obviously, I think he was suspended at one time at LSU, and he was up and down in his career. The size and speed combination is what made it a shocker for me. Now, I think there were times in the past where, as an LSU, I'm pretty sure Kevin Tolliver was a five-star guy coming out of high school. This was a highly regarded recruit. I don't know that he ever hit that ceiling. So you do wonder, listen, one more year, play opposite Greedy Williams maybe, you might be able to make a lot more stock for yourself.
Let's do item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. It was quite a performance of the SEC in the NFL draft. 2 schools in particular really setting high marks. Alabama sets an SEC record with 12 players selected over the course of the weekend. Georgia comes with an eyelash of a program record. Dogs do have 6 players drafted in the 2018 draft. And for Marcus Spears on the SEC Network, he says the big showing from Alabama, the big showing from Georgia, just the start of what he views as a budding rivalry. Here is Marcus Spears from the SEC Network.
We're about to see Georgia and Alabama go at it for years to come. You look at the 2 coaches, same philosophy. They want the same type of football player. Right. When you look at Roquan Smith and Rashaan Evans, there's a lot of comparables. Roquan Smith is better, but there's a lot of comparables. 2 guys that can play sideline to sideline and that are fast. But you look at the lifeblood of these universities, it is recruiting. All right. What was the top team in the SEC years ago? LSU. Coincidentally, it was a bunch of dudes going in the first round. Right. So that trend has already been a foregone conclusion at Alabama. Kirby is about to start it up.
So there is no doubt that what Spears says there about recruiting being the lifeblood, absolutely true. And right now, there are no 2 programs in the SEC recruiting at a higher pace than what Georgia and Alabama are. It was 1 point LSU. They've kind of faltered a little bit when it comes to recruiting just a bit. But how about Spears' larger point that this is the beginning of 2 teams that are going to be battling it out on the recruiting trail and also on the field for many years to come? Did that begin in 2017, and was the 2018 draft another step in that direction?
It'd be hard to argue against what Marcus Spears is saying there, right? When you do look at the drafted players and you look at, it's not just to me about the talent, because that to me, that's, and you guys know how I feel about recruiting, sometimes it's a little bit overblown. Now, I do agree with it as a whole, but you look at guys like Roquan and Lorenzo Carter and some of these other guys that are being drafted. Was their ceiling going to be that good without Kirby Smart there? A lot of times Georgia has had a ton of players drafted, but I think the development is there where these guys are now hitting another gear at Georgia. So you do line that up, and it's a shame that these guys aren't on the schedule for each other in the next couple of years because, boy, there is going to be a ton of talent in these pipelines. You look at Alabama, and you just said it, 12 players drafted, 17 players overall headed to the NFL after the undrafted free agents are signed. Every player off of 2016's defense was a draft pick in the NFL. It's crazy right now, and you see Georgia headed that direction. It's the development from both sides. Not so much the recruiting for me, the development that kind of makes that obvious.
What's amazing to me, though, when you look at Alabama here is, 12 guys drafted, which is an unbelievable total. And for the most part, when a team would lose in the past, like as recently as 5 years ago, if you lost 12 guys off last year's team, you were expected to take a step back in the upcoming season. Right. But it was BetDSI or one of these online sports books has Alabama somewhere in the neighborhood of 2-1 to win this year's national championship. By far and away, the overwhelming favorite to win the national championship here in 2018. To think that you could be almost an even money favorite to win this year's national championship after losing 12 guys to the NFL off last year's team. Listen, as a Georgia fan, I'd love nothing more to say Georgia is going to be on that par for many years to come. But this draft weekend was a reminder to all of us, it is really hard to match what Alabama's doing.
It really is unbelievable. You had players that were backups at positions. When you look at some of the things that were going on, players that were backups at some of these positions that ended up being draft picks. Josh Casher is one of those guys. You never even heard about this guy in college. Yeah. The regular SEC fan doesn't even hear about a guy like that, and he's getting drafted and going on. Same thing for Bo Scarborough. You love Bo, and he did bust on the scene at sometimes. never rushed for 1,000 yards in college. I mean, it was always running back by committee. And so you look at that specific positions, you look at the secondary, you look at where guys were going. It is truly astounding what they've built there in Tuscaloosa.
So on the comment section on Facebook, Bo Molinari says it's bulletin board material for Jimbo Fisher and Gus Malzahn. That's true. Both those coaches are going to try to be that school along with Georgia, who's really challenging Alabama here. What gives Georgia a leg up over an Auburn or a Texas A&M for the moment is not just the head-to-head victory, that Georgia scored over Auburn in terms of winning the SEC championship. But the fact is, you look at the 2019 recruiting cycle, you look at the 2018 recruiting cycle, you see examples, and the folks that watch the show that follow recruiting closely know this. You see examples of players that Georgia got that Alabama wanted. For the most part, you don't really see Auburn right now getting a lot of players that Alabama wants. You don't see Texas A&M yet getting a lot of players that Alabama wants. Yes, a lot of these players will say Alabama's a finalist, but is Alabama really recruiting that player heavily? More often than not, as of late, the Auburn recruits, the Texas A&M recruits, that hasn't been the case. Georgia's one of the few schools, and probably the only school in the SEC right now, that's going head-to-head with Alabama and getting players that Alabama's recruiting hard. That's why Georgia's in this conversation. For the moment, Auburn, Texas A&M are not yet.
Well, I think we can talk about drafted players, but I think there has to be a balance, right? I mean, it's not just a drafted player conversation in terms of what programs are where, because I think you can look at drafted players, you can look at the program and say, what was their ceiling? Because I think the argument is there that, you could throw LSU into this conversation all you want to. I mean, what did they have, 7, 8 players drafted this past weekend at LSU? I mean, even Danny Etling, I think,
he did get drafted.
So you look at it, though, and you say, does the recruiting right now match what we're seeing of exiting this program? That's always been my kind of gripe of what Ed Orgeron is doing right now. I don't think that what's leaving in that draft matches what's being brought into the program, and so when you have the outlook, that's where it kind of gets skewed.
You've got more outgo than you have income,
which I think is
right
scary.
Now at LSU. You use the word scary. That's not too strong of a word to use for LSU now.
It's a scary thing, and it's not to say that LSU is going to be a bad football team. You guys know I think LSU is a very good football team, very athletic, very talented. I just think that's a scary proposition that if Ed Orgeron can't get back to that plane where it's top 5 classes, it's a scary thing, all that talent going out the door.
Let us talk about the Mississippi State Bulldogs for a moment. It's item number 6 in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Cole Kublik, who's a SEC analyst, he works now on WJOX, a very good sports radio station there in the Alabama area, Birmingham. He was interviewed recently by SEC Country on a wide-ranging number of subjects, and one of those was the future for Mississippi State. He was asked about, the possibilities for State this upcoming season. He said they're a potentially dangerous team here for 2018, and went into a little bit more detail about the Bulldogs, saying Mississippi State is a team that can surprise some people again. Now, will they expand upon their wins from a year ago? They had a pretty good year, so I don't know if they can win more than 8 regular season games. That's Cole Kublik there, the SEC analyst, who was interviewed by Andrew Astleford. And I think the way that Cole describes that there is pretty appropriate. And for me, if we're not talking about a 9th or 10th regular season win for Mississippi State, then what are we even talking about? Because at this point in time, 8-4 regular season does nothing for me. Mississippi State for me is only interesting if it's 9-3, if it's 10-2. If you can't find that 9th win or that 10th regular season win, then I just assume not talk about it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's you wonder if this year for Mississippi State, and I hate that he uses the word dangerous to me, because that word dangerous is almost profiling Mississippi State, right? You're saying they're dangerous because you wonder if your team might be the one to fall to Mississippi State. You know what I mean?
That's so well said.
You say dangerous, is my team the one that's going to go down to Mississippi State? Well, it turns out maybe Mississippi State's got higher expectations for themselves this year, and that's what I'm so curious to see out of this Moorhead regime. He's got all the talented players there. He's got all the depth coming back. Their defensive front is going to be very scary. Their offensive backfield is incredible. They're too deep even at quarterback. I mentioned the other day with Keaton Thompson. What's the ceiling for them? I think they've got to move from being dangerous, are they going to beat my team, to, boy, I do not want to play Mississippi State this weekend. They are a really good football team.
So I'm going to nitpick something you said there and read too deeply into your words. You said they've got to move from being dangerous to something more. They don't have to. They just want to.
Right. Yeah. I'm speaking for Mississippi State.
There's no law that says you have to evolve to the next phase of the program.
Yes.
They might. I don't expect them to, but just because you want to doesn't mean you get to. Because the point here is the SEC West is a very, very crowded division. It's not as good as it was in 2014 when they were number 1 in Mississippi State and you still had Dak Prescott, but it's still a really good division. What you're describing to me right now is an 8-4 regular season, a bowl win to get you to 9. That's a top 25 team, which is a really good year. It's hard to be in the top 25 in college football. There are 130 teams that play at the major college level. But you're also like 4th best in the SEC West, with Jimbo Fisher building a juggernaut behind you at A&M, nipping on your heels there.
Yeah.
There's too much hype for a team that's only going to finish 4th best in the SEC West.
Well, I have them picked higher than 4th in the SEC West this year. And
I think they're better than Auburn?
I think that there's a very real chance that they come in 3rd or 2nd in the SEC West this year. But I can't proclaim that yet because I know nothing about Joe Moorhead as a head coach. I mean, that's what makes it tough. I think the reason I phrase it that way is piggybacking off the way you kind of made this statement. If they're not going to do that, then what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
And I completely agree with that because I'm saying if we're going to move on from that conversation of what are we talking about here to 9-10 wins, they've got to start winning some of these games and stepping out. It can't be, oh, we beat LSU by 30 points and then get blown out by Auburn the next week.
How about this 4-week stretch? Now, this includes a bye week on October 13th. It's Auburn, bye, at LSU, home versus Texas A&M. The 3 teams they're competing with to leapfrog somebody into that sort of upper tier of the SEC West, they play them all consecutively with a bye week in between the Auburn and the LSU game. But boy, at LSU, back home again against Texas A&M, that's a tough back-to-back stretch in consecutive Saturdays. I mean, that month of October, and I'm not even getting to at Alabama on November 10th, a game that I don't expect them to compete in. But the 3 games they need to be 9-3, 10-2, Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, those are consecutive games.
No, I agree. And listen, I'm not even looking at it right now. The leeway into that Auburn game, I believe, is the Florida Gators with Dan Mullen.
Yeah.
And that is
good point.
I'm not even telling you because you guys know that I'm a little bit higher on Florida, but I'm not telling you about that being a physically demanding game or a sure L or a sure win for Mississippi State. It's going to be an emotional game. That's going to be an emotional game to start off that stretch you're just talking about. You just wonder about bouncing back from that win or loss.
Cliff Nelson, I mentioned a moment ago that I believe that Jimbo Fisher could be building a juggernaut at Texas A&M. Cliff on YouTube asked a fair question. He says, why is it BA that Jimbo Fisher's building a juggernaut but Ed Orgeron isn't? Cliff, here's the thing for me, and I hate to say this because I love the great LSU camaraderie we have on the comment section every single day. Jimbo Fisher's out recruiting LSU right now. LSU is not getting the players that it once got. It's just not. I mean, they got a 4-star linebacker over the weekend. That's great. But, the narrative is that he chose LSU over Alabama. Look a little bit more deeply into that. I'm not quite sure that's exactly the case. I mean, this is put up or shut up time for Ed Orgeron as a recruiter right now.
No, I agree. That's the simple answer here is why are we talking about Jimbo Fisher building something over Ed Orgeron? It's just like we talked about for the draft. And I think that, listen, you guys know I love this LSU fan section. I'm just like you. I mean, we can talk about the recruiting going. That wasn't a terrible recruiting year for LSU by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, they're like, 15th ranked class when it really came down to it. But that's not LSU's standard. That's not the Patrick Peterson classes and some of the other classes you've had coming in. That's not their standard. And I think until Ed Orgeron proves that these guys – it goes back to the Patrick Surtain conversation. That had to be LSU, and it wasn't. And I think, when we talk about the guy, Soapshire, that we were talking about last week, that's who Ed Orgeron has to land. If you want to get me talking about LSU building a juggernaut, those are the guys they have to get on campus.
That's well said. Couple more comments on this, and we'll change the subject. Rick Keene says, how can they say anything about an unknown for a coach? No one knows if he means Joe Moorhead, can motivate, lead a practice, or even recruit. 7 wins is their ceiling. I would say the ceiling may be a little bit higher than that. I think there's a big difference between 8 and 7. I think you can get to 8, but 9-3, 10-2 is going to be hard. Now, no one knows more about Mississippi State than our buddy Brandon Walker, who we see in the comment section virtually on a daily basis. He also does the More Cowbell podcast for SEC Country. He says Mississippi State used that same 3-game stretch, that was the Auburn, the LSU, Texas A&M, to leap to number 1 in 2014. LSU, A&M, and Auburn. They won't leap that high this year, but they can win all 3. That's a bold, very interesting statement from Brandon Walker there. Really good stuff. Speaking of it, Texas A&M, let's make the Aggies the subject of item number 7 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Jimbo sat down for an interview with the SEC Network on this subject of building juggernauts and achieving more than you have in the past. It got pretty interesting here. It's Jordan Rodgers, the former Vandy quarterback, and I guess the former Bachelor, conducting the interview here. He's an SEC Network analyst now. And he asked Jimbo Fisher about, hey, Kevin Sumlin just got fired for winning only 7 or 8 games a season. How do you deal with that kind of pressure knowing you've got to be better than that? And Jimbo gave the answer that Aggies fans want to hear. Here is Jimbo Fisher on that subject.
That expectation here more than anywhere has been set at 8 wins is not good enough, 7 wins is not good enough, making bowl games is not good enough. National championships, SEC championships. How do you deal with that pressure in managing 17, 18, 19-year-olds?
That wasn't good enough at Florida State. I've been in it my whole life. Wasn't good enough at LSU when I was at LSU. Wasn't good enough at Auburn when I was at Auburn. If you're not somewhere that wants that, that's not the job you want.
I mean, to me, if you're an A&M fan, how can you not love that right there? 2 things. Expectations are going to be high at Texas A&M. I've achieved things in the past. Won a national championship as a head coach at Florida State. Won a national championship as an offensive coordinator at LSU. That's a guy that says, I've got a resume that has championships in my background, and A&M's going to talk championships from now on. I think you really love that if you're a Texas A&M fan.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it. And right now, and it's like we mentioned, I mean, he is putting his money where his mouth is on the recruiting trail. And I think that's what's so awesome about what Texas A&M did. It's not like Texas A&M's never had talent. I mean, they've had talent. I don't know that it always got developed in the way that Kevin Sumlin probably should have developed it. And you had guys, Luke Jokel and Jake Matthews and, Christian Kirk this past weekend. You've had guys coming out that are very good. And you look at it and say, boy, how do we not win any more than we did over this stretch? And I think what you have there is, and I talk about the check marks of being a national championship caliber program, Jimbo Fisher, when given the talent, can coach to that elite level. And I think that's what's so exciting. And the knock I hear on Jimbo Fisher is this. Boy, he comes from the ACC. The SEC is different. Jimbo Fisher knows that. He's been in the SEC, right? He's coached at a place like LSU. He's coached around the country. He knows what the difference is. He knows what talented players look like. And right now, a lot of them are headed to College Station.
And look, let me be very, very blunt here for a moment. The Big 12 has a stench that's really hard to wash off. A&M been in the SEC since 2012, but it takes about a decade or so to get that Big 12 stench off of you.
Stench, I love that.
Just look at the NFL draft this past weekend. What they have, like 5 guys in the whole league get drafted. Look at the record for Big 12 quarterbacks recently in the NFL. Way below 500 here. That is a soft pillow fight finesse league. A&M had a lot of that stuff stuck on them going back to the Kevin Sumlin era, who's a perfect fit for the Big 12, and he'll probably be fine in the Pac-12, but in the SEC, it's just a little bit more smash mouth. Jimbo Fisher brings that mentality. To me, A&M is now fully ingrained into the SEC way of life. They have got an SEC-style coach. They're going to play SEC-style defense, and all that junk in Texas, where they're essentially playing arena league football at the high school level there. Jimbo Fisher's not going to have any of that kind of stuff. That's why I think the future is bright for Jimbo Fisher. It's a brand of football delivered to College Station that looks a lot more like the SEC than their neighbors, who are essentially playing two-hand touch.
Right. A&M has gone from wide receiver league, quarterback league, to building from outside in. You look at what that offensive line could be. You look at really their strength up the middle with their linebackers and a couple of those guys right there down there in front of the defense line. Now they're still searching for pass rushers at this point from the guys they've lost the last couple of years, but they're going to find them. And Jimbo Fisher is going to find that speed and that size combination. I completely agree with you. When Texas A&M and Missouri were brought into this conference, it was tough for me as a guy who had played in the 12-team SEC league to look at Texas A&M and think, boy, SEC team right there. But I could not agree with you more at this point, to where I see what Jimbo Fisher's doing, I see the way he's talking, and I think Texas A&M is definitely part of the SEC at this point.
On Facebook, Bradley Bush, who I'm pretty sure is an LSU fan, says that LSU is going to sneak up on everybody here in 2018, and maybe that's the case. On Auburn, the talk about Texas A&M, maybe LSU does get the laugh last, which is one of the reasons why we love playing this stuff out during the fall. Let me do item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Florida had a nice piece of good news for one of their former defensive linemen, as Taven Bryan was taken in the first round of the 2018 NFL Draft. And on the night before the draft, Bryan was caught up with by TMZ, sort of cornering him, which is usually not a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to say.
In this case, it actually works out pretty well. The reporter here is asking Bryan about how he's going to spend his money in the NFL, and his dad sort of pops up with a pretty cool piece of fatherly advice. I thought this was a nice moment. Check this out from TMZ.
This is like a whole new life that you're about to walk into. What's the first thing you got like on your radar? Like, I got to do the car for moms, the crib. What is it? What is it? What's on the list, man?
I might pay off my parents' bills.
Wow. Wow. Honestly, think about that. That's powerful, dude.
Yeah.
But
he needs to save his money because you never know how long this career is going to last. I'll probably just buy a new computer or something.
That's powerful, dude. Maybe the least sincere compliment I've ever heard. Hey, that's powerful, dude.
Hey, man, good for you.
That's like something a drunk guy says to his friend at like 1:30 in the morning. Like, hey, man, that's powerful. Like, he doesn't mean that. But what his dad says there is cool. His dad's kind of off mic. He's like, hey, he's not going to pay off our bills. He needs to save his money because he doesn't know how long his career is going to last. And even for a first-round draft pick, that is for the most part true here. Love Taven Bryan's dad giving the great dad advice here. That's a great job by Mr. Bryan.
It really is, because it's so true. I mean, it's so true. I can't tell you how many guys that I've seen that either coming out of college and they think, boy, when I get this paycheck, get that paycheck. Guess what? First of all, Uncle Sam's taking half that. You start dwindling down. Boy, I want my own house. I have my own bills. I want my own family. And it's gone before you know it. And that money is just not an ever-ending supply. It's not a career. Playing football is not a career. It's a job. Mm-hmm. And it's very temporary in the NFL, and I love the fact that his dad said that.
Yeah, if you spend more than 8% of your total contract value in any 1 year, you're going to go broke eventually. It's just a matter of how fast it's going to go broke.
No, you cannot spend it 8%. That is definitely true.
So good job there by Taven Bryan's dad, and congratulations to the Gators on getting Bryan in the first round of this year's draft. By the way, speaking of the draft, let's do item number 9 here and get some quick final thoughts on the draft. It was a nice day for a nice weekend for the SEC. They dominate again for the 12th consecutive year. SEC has more draft picks than any other conference. Loaded in the first round. Overall takeaways from you in terms of either fits for guys at certain places or just sort of overall thoughts on the league and how it performed here over the weekend?
I thought it was par for the course. Isn't that crazy to say? Like 12 years in a row, the SEC's led and some of these guys, and it really has been the golden years. I mean, it just, I can't tell you back from when Nick Saban's first year at Alabama, and obviously that's the one I'm going to talk about in terms of the draft. Nick Saban's first year at Alabama, not one Alabama player drafted in 2007. And it just is mind-boggling to me what not only he has done since then, but what the entire SEC really has done from a talent perspective has gone crazy. And that imprint is all over the NFL when you watch. And that's one of the fun things for me as an SEC fan and a former NFL guy. You can turn on the TV on any Sunday and you can see those SEC guys fulfilling their dreams.
Thought it was interesting that Danny Etling going to get his shot to be in New England. That's
me, I love it, man. Yeah. I've been on that Etling bandwagon.
So we're Khalil McKenzie, the Tennessee guy. Raiders actually asking him to switch over and play offensive line, maybe. That's kind of an interesting spot there.
Stuff.
So some kind of interesting nuggets even sort of down the draft pecking order there. That's all going to be fun to watch here over the course of the summer as these NFL training camps get going. For item number 10, though, on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, let's go back to the Iron Bowl here for a moment, but a slightly different version of the Iron Bowl than you've ever maybe seen in the past. The SEC Golf Championship for the men was this weekend. Auburn beats Alabama in sort of spectacular walk-off fashion. We've got a couple video angles to show you on this. What a great way for this rivalry to be renewed in golf, and what a thrilling conclusion to the event here. Take a look at this first from the SEC, the video they captured of the Auburn moment here. Here's the match-winning putt. I love the walk-off and the walk-away by the Auburn guy when he does it. It takes some real stones to start walking away from a putt while it's still rolling. I think we have another angle we can show you here that maybe gives you a little bit better look at from the SEC network. Watch him start walking. I mean, that is a bad move right there, man.
I love it, man.
I don't know who that guy is. That is maximum respect.
Yes.
Because if that thing misses, and trust me, I'm the guy in every pickup basketball game who starts jogging back on the jump shot and that thing's clanging off the rim. It's one thing to do that. The bank is open. Yeah, it's one thing to do that in a rec league basketball game. It's another thing to have that happen to you in the SEC tournament on TV like that. Oh, that's pretty awesome.
No, I love it. Yeah, you can almost think about the way things could have alternated. He's going to turn around and fall to his knees if the thing doesn't go in, you know what I mean? But he does. It's like he knew it as soon as he hit it. He kind of stood up boy, that's the right line. That's the right speed.
Yeah.
I hit that thing pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Really good stuff there for item number 10 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. To finish the show, though, we're always looking for champions of life. And if that was good, this is the exact opposite of good. The Tampa Bay Bucks, you may have heard, for one of their draft picks, this was a second or third round pick. I'm not even sure if it's a second or third round pick. They were going to bring out a parrot from a bird sanctuary or something, and the whole thing is just pretty weird.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Watch this. The parrot doesn't really do anything. This to me is a huge fail. Here is the Tampa Bay Bucks and their parrot here, and none of this really works.
delivering a pick in Tampa to a fake pirate ship in a half-empty stadium. That's exactly what I wanted.
All right, watch this.
With the 117th pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Jordan Whitehead, defensive back from Pittsburgh.
Now, she's trying to get the parrot to talk, and that parrot's just standing there.
Before you start,
I got no interest in being here right now. I love Watch her. Look how hard she's trying to get that thing to talk.
Yeah, trying to get it to flex its wings out. Yeah, put the wings.
Like, how bad do you feel if you're Jordan Whitehead here? This is your big moment. You just got drafted in the NFL. This is the thing you want to remember for the rest of your life, and you got this, gal trying to get a parrot to talk on TV. Why are we turning the draft into a circus?
Yeah, first of all, the parrot was the one supposed to say the draft pick, right? I mean, the parrot was supposed to come out and give the draft pick. Evidently, that was not going to happen.
I think that was always bait and switch. I think what they wanted the parrot to do is say, "Go Box," or whatever the parrot would say. I think that's what they were trying to do. But the parrot wouldn't even do that.
No. And what's funny to me is the people that are flanking on each side, they're like, "This is our Super Bowl. Like, this is our shining moment."
Well,
like
she actually had she actually fired back at her critics. This is a true story. She said that the people who were criticizing them were like Monday morning quarterbacks. You'll never visit our bird sanctuary. You don't know what we go through on a daily basis.
Good for her.
Stop trying to criticize us. No, not good for her. I never want to see that again. I do want to see you again tomorrow, though, here on SEC Country Live. In between now and then, you can check us out on our podcast. The audio version will be up for you right away. You can also share the show with your friends on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Let folks know we're talking about the SEC here each and every afternoon. Thanks for being with us today. We'll see you again tomorrow, both at 3 p.m. for SEC Country Live, and then tomorrow evening for coverage of what they're calling the Grayson Four. 4 big prospects, all may choose SEC schools. We'll cover it for you live at 5:30 p.m. tomorrow. We'll see you then, right here on SEC Country Live.